Hari Ravichandran. Now, he's the CEO and founder of Aura, an engineer by training and an entrepreneur by nature. Now, Hari has a track record of founding successful businesses in technology and web security. Hari, how are you doing today?
Great. Thank you for having me, Phil. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. I love the idea of you being an engineer by training and an entrepreneur by nature because those usually don't go hand in hand. There are some, but it's rare that you're able to have that much of a craft and skill and then still also have such a vision for business. So I have to ask, before we dive into what you do at Aura and what your vision is, do you come from a family of engineers or entrepreneurs?
I come from a family of entrepreneurs, actually. So my grandfather, my dad always was dabbling in a lot of different kind of businesses and ventures. So growing up, I definitely saw a lot of that, and that was perhaps got stuck in the back of my mind that it's a way to make a living, and it's kind of exciting, interesting, and they were always passionate about it. So I definitely got to see that growing up.
Cool. And at what point did you, in growing up to see that, at what point did you decide I'm going to be an engineer? Because right, you think it's entrepreneurs and then you went the route to the engineer. Was that just your doing or your family asked you to focus on that?
Yeah, I had an interesting background because I grew up in India till I was around 14 or so.
Oh,
So a lot of the,
wow.
yeah, so a lot of the startups and like a lot of the things that my family was doing was out there. But they were always sort of, now we call them kind of the gig economy or side hustles, but back then, my dad actually he was an academic, right? And so he was basically focused on academia. He came to the US, I think, on a Fulbright Fellowship, which is sort of like the Rhodes Scholarship for Science. And so he ended up spending 2 years doing that work. And then he went back to India because the way the program worked, you couldn't stay here for beyond the program for more than a couple of years, and you had to go back to your country, basically. And so when he came back, he said, I really loved it out there. This is like, again, the late 80s. And, he's like, oh, I loved it out there. I want our kids to go to the US because there's so much opportunities there, right? That was sort of his big mindset at the time. So I ended up moving out to this country because my dad said, he found this Rotary exchange program where you could go live in the US for a little bit. And it was for like a year, you could come live out in the US. And on the way out, when we were leaving India, he said, look, this is like a huge opportunity for you. I was 14 at the time. And he said, when you get there, just figure out a way never to come back. Right. And so I was like, wow, that's, it's definitely sort of a lot of intensity around it. So when I got to this country, I ended up going to the high school that they placed me at in Martinsburg, West Virginia. And I went and asked the guidance counselor, hey, how do I figure out a way to, stay in this country and keep going? And she said, oh, you should, go to college. And at the time, to me, the safest approach felt like, becoming an engineer because my path would be much more defined and clear, where you go to engineering school, you can get a job, and that's sort of an opportunity to keep continuing on to stay in the country, to get sponsored for a green card, all that type of stuff. So that really took me away from what I feel was my real calling and passion, basically. And so not until I was around 20 or so, when I started my last company, I just had a moment where I'm like, hey, I just don't feel like I'm on my path. Like I feel like I'm doing engineering and I'm reasonably good at it and doing all these things, but I feel my real calling is to build things and be closer to the customer. And so that was my quick journey there.
I love that, because then ultimately you did launch one company, like you said, and it was your last company. And did you take any learnings away from that you brought into Aura when you founded it?
Yeah, so many. The last one I started, I was 20 at the time, and it was just like this amazing, exciting time. It was like the late 90s. The dot-com sort of craze was happening at that time. Everybody was starting a company. Everybody was sort of, doing things that seemed very exciting to me. And I remember thinking at the time, the last business I started, there was no grand ambition. Like I wasn't sitting there going, oh, like I want to go change the world, or I want to build, a multi-billion-dollar business or anything like that. I had thought about it very simplistically, which is, look, I like the freedom of building things that I like to build and having freedom in my life. And so to get freedom, what does it really come down to, right? Which then at the time, the way I thought about it is, look, I mean, when I add up all my bills every month, they seem to add up to around 2 grand a month, right? And so that's somewhat in between my rent and everything else. So I thought if I start something and I can make 2 grand a month, anything I do above and beyond that is a bonus, but I get to live my life and I get to do things that would be really interesting or exciting for me, right? So that really was the big notion that was going through my head at the time. And in a lot of ways, when you think about stuff that way, taking risk gets a little bit easier because it's much more tangible. Now you're thinking about it not in terms of, oh my gosh, like I have to have a massive success, it has to be, really big, et cetera. You can now think about it more in terms of much more defined thing. And the more you can sort of, create that bit of downside around the risk where you're looking at it going, okay, this is something sort of, I can understand, I can get my head around. It makes it easier to take the next step and the next step and the next step. So in that company, started, really with that kind of a simple notion where I then said, okay, how do I leverage any skills I have to be able to make 2 grand a month, right? I mean, those are like the basic question. And then the internet was just getting going at the time. This is again like 96, 97 timeframe. And I ended up, really kind of building a business, helping other small businesses get on the internet because they couldn't write the code for it to be able to put their websites online and all that type of stuff. And so that's how it got started. And then, we had almost a 21-year run of, ups and downs and sideways. And eventually when I left that business, that started with a very simple proposition. In 2017, when I left that company to start Aura, we were doing $1.2 billion in revenue. So it was a public company. We had 4,500 employees. It was worth about $3.5 billion. But it was all sort of these incremental steps. And the hardest thing is taking that first step and getting your mind around the risk and then moving forward, because over time you find out you're good at a lot of things you don't think about if you don't give yourself a shot at it. And so that was my kind of big learning from that experience.
It's valuable to be able to sit there and say to yourself, even from the very beginning, to set that seed into the soul of the company, say, look, what does it look like at the minimum we have to this, as opposed to I've got to make this vague notion of what success is. You're like, no, here's a clearly defined bottom line I have to meet. And it slowly grew over time as the needs dictated. And eventually the team expanded to be able to serve more customers. It makes sense. And it's a very practical and surefire way, with, all things withstanding of whatever risk anyone takes on just being alive and operating a business in the world. But for the most part, it's a very good way of looking at things as opposed to all the pressure people put on themselves. So I'm glad you brought that in.
Yeah, the one thing that I did learn on that journey is you got to have almost two gears, right? So you've got a gear where you're thinking about how to make the great products and and things that sort of drive another $50,000-$100,000 worth of revenue. But at the same time, you also have another lever that you're looking at saying, how do I also make this thing be worth several billions of dollars, right? And so you kind of have to have both these gears and make sure that, depending, again, you don't want to do this on day one, but as you're going on the journey, it is a skill you're going to want to cultivate, is beyond the short term, how do these things sort of impact our revenue, our growth, our product, our customers? How do we also kind of figure out how to dream big and know that these things are connecting to something in the longer term as well, basically. So it's almost like kind of that 2-gear model where you're thinking about tomorrow and next month, but you're also thinking about 5 or 10 years down the road as well, if you can. So
yeah, what is a brainstorming session when you want to 10x something like that look like for you? When you're like, you know what, it's time to start thinking big. We've got a pretty stable, at least recurring revenue coming in, so we know where that's going. We know what tomorrow and next month looks like. Now we want to start dreaming big. What would you and your brainstorming session look like? Who do you call into the room? What do you start throwing down on paper?
Yeah, so you kind of look at both kind of external input from advisors and people outside. So talking to your board members in our particular case, talking to investors, talking to people that have been in either similar or adjacent journeys and getting a lot of feedback from them as well. And then sitting down with the team and thinking about, like, the way I tend to think about it is, your vision for what you want to build, it doesn't change. Like, you've got a North Star, right? So you're saying, okay, like in the long term, whether it's 10 years away or 20 years away, like in the case of Aura, for example, we want to create a safer internet for everybody, right? And so that vision is never going to change. And that's always a work in process. Like, it's never going to be done. Like, by the time we get to a place where we think we're going to a good spot, there's going to be new things to kind of have to worry about, right? So that's always there. Then you say, okay, when we think about it over the next 3 year cycle, right? Where are we at today, and what do we need to invest behind, and what do we need to add, and what's missing that gets us a little bit closer to that longer term North Star, right? So you say, okay, to be able to create a safer internet, you got to get a lot of people to use our product, right? And to get a lot of people to use our product, we have to get better distribution. To get better distribution, our product needs to have all of these additional features on top of it. To add all those additional features, you're going to have to add X number of engineers and product people and designers and people like that, right? So it goes almost from that very long term to, okay, well, what does that mean for us, like in the next 3 months or 6 months, for what we got to get done to get a little bit of a step closer to that longer term view.
I love that sort of reverse engineering from the end and seeing what parts are missing in the present moment and working towards that. Yeah, I mean,
exactly right.
That's the thing about business, right? It's pretty straightforward, but sometimes it's not common sense to common sense people. It's just ironic that way, and it's almost a gift as an entrepreneur to be able to put yourself in that state of mind where you can make that progress, where most people start to feel hesitancy or resistance because they're the uncertainty of the tomorrow, even with predictable revenue. Well, what if everything goes wrong? And how do you get yourself to shift out of mind states like that? Because they happen to all entrepreneurs, as I've had conversations with people. How are you able to shift yourself out of that and back onto the focus at hand?
Yes, I mean, so this is sort of that 2 gear model that I was talking about, right? So if you're always in that long gear where you're continuously saying, hey, like, I want to go change the world, I want to build the world's like biggest company around this, it's so amorphous. Like the best example I'll give you, like for companies that somebody was telling me the other day, and I loved it, so I'm going to repeat it here. When you're building stuff, you've got, like two kinds of people, right? So you've got Greeks and you've got Romans, right? So the Greeks, they like to dream, right? They, are like, oh, like we want to build this big thing. If we, capture this and take that and all that stuff, we're going to build this big empire, right? And then you got the Romans that are like, all right, let's start building bridges. Like, let's go, like, just go start doing the thing. Like, put, lay down roads, like, build a bridge type of thing. The trouble is, if you don't have both kinds of people in your business and you don't have both modes of thinking, you can really limit yourself, because if all you're doing is continuously dreaming about the big idea, etc., it's going to get overwhelming, because you're like, I don't know where to start. Like, I don't know what I need to actually build today or tomorrow or anything like that. That's sort of that too focused on that long gear piece of it. But then if you're someone that just continuously just keeps building roads and bridges because you're just doing stuff, it may be things that don't lead you to anywhere, right? Because you don't have the dream of what the thing ought to be in the long term, right? So you kind of need both. So you need a certain amount of sort of the Greek mindset and a little bit of that Roman mindset too, where you're saying, okay, like, I got to be able to dream about something that gets big and exciting, which is sort of that long gear. But I also got to kind of get into that mindset of, I'm not going to get there tomorrow or next month or next year. It's going to take me a long time to get there. So how do I start, building bridges and building roads to get to that long-term view, so you don't get so bogged down and overwhelmed, or you don't think about it too short-term, where all you're doing is just doing things because you're doing things and it doesn't add up to anything else in the long term.
Yeah, man, that duality. So then Aura, you have all these learnings and you jump into Aura. Is it with partners? And I think you mentioned some board advisors. And so you had partners and that whole thing was ready to go, or did you have to piece it together like the Romans with this Greek vision?
Yeah, no, we definitely had to piece it together. In 2014, I had this personal incident, right, where basically, I think I was like applying for a loan or something like that, and it said that my identity had been stolen, and I thought, I was like, oh no, like, I don't know what this is. And so I started digging into it, and I thought, it's not 2014. I'm thinking there's got to be a solution out there in the market. You can just go buy it, and it's going to be simple. It's going to be easy to set up. I started digging into it. The thing I find out is it was non-trivial. Like, it basically, you have to call the banks, you got to call the bureaus. There was all this like complexity. And I remember thinking, I'm a fairly technical person, and still this was a real hassle for me. Like, it took me like, weeks and weeks and multiple months to get this stuff all cleaned up. And it was surprising there really wasn't a solution out in the market for this. So fast forward to 2017. So I thought about it, and I remember thinking, somebody's going to solve this thing, because it's a big problem. It's going to affect, it is affecting, and going to keep on affecting a lot of people. And then 2017, when I got the bug to go do another startup again, basically because at that point, my previous company was a good sized public company, and I really kind of missed building. And so as we are getting into this, there was a group of us that were sitting there thinking about, okay, we need a few sort of pillars about what are things we want to get done right this time. Right. So we're like, look, in the last journey, we did a good job with the product. We didn't do a great job with it. We should have done better. So that was one big pillar. We wanted to make sure that this time we built a brand because it's going to be very critical. We wanted to make sure we got the culture right in the business because as a first-time entrepreneur, the last time we got it right in some places, but some places we didn't get it right. And so, that was sort of a lot of the learnings around that. And then we said that's on the philosophy of the business. Then on the problem we want to solve, it's got to be something big. It affects a lot of people. It's got to be a complex problem, getting even more complex. And then we started looking at a bunch of data, and we saw that there were a lot of consumers that were shopping for a whole bunch of different security products that were all from different places and different vendors. And I remember telling the team, I'm like, oh, look, I actually personally went through this back in 2014. And it's crazy because it's overwhelming. You have no idea, if you've taken care of it, you have no idea how people got your data. How did your identity get stolen in the first place? Does it impact other stuff? Does it affect my kids? Like all of this type of stuff. So I was like, look, I feel like there's going to be a good opportunity here to integrate a multiple of these different things into an easy to use, simple product that consumers can just set it and forget it and not have to think about it. And I think we should go after that. And so that's how we got started with Aura. So it was basically the combination of personal experience, a philosophical view of how we ought to build a business, and then some structural pillars of what kind of problem we wanted to solve that was kind of meaningful, had an impact. So those were sort of the makings of how this all came together, basically.
Yeah, there's so much integrity behind this business story because it's number one, it's built on an actual use case of like this is value we're contributing to a customer or an audience. And with learnings from a previous business, ready to set it up in exactly the way a business. I mean, and nothing's ever going to be perfect, but man, it doesn't get any better than having that as the primer for starting a business. And so then Aura, you decided on the name like sort of arbitrarily, so we need a name, or was there a little further into it?
Yeah, no. So when we started, it was actually called I Subscribed, right? Which is like a very sort of quick and easy name. We just have to have a name for it. But
Sure.
I would say, 2 years, a year and a half ago in June, we went through a whole exercise where we said, look, it's got to be something that's meaningful because it's starting to now take off. It's going to be good. I Subscribed was sort of like a placeholder type of name, and it kind of stuck basically. So we did a bunch of work, came up with like 75 different names. And Aura was the first one on the list because it
It's
started
not
with A.
easy.
It was
Yeah.
alphabetical. Yeah. And I looked at it, I'm like, wow, like I don't even know if I want to look at the rest of the list. It's an amazing name. It has this like, mystical sense about it. It
Yeah.
felt like kind of like the image it conjures up is like a shield or this thing like
I was
around a
gonna
human that
say,
protects
yep.
them.
Yep.
Right. And so like the energy of a person. So like we're like, yeah, this is it. We gotta go, we gotta name the whole thing Aura. And so that's how the name stuck,
I love
basically.
that. It makes so much sense. That was my first thought intuitively was, okay, if we're talking about cybersecurity, web security, the Aura, the OS that protects me kind of thing, yeah. I'm
Exactly, like your energy shield. Yeah.
I'm about it, man. I'm about it. So now how are things looking at Aura? Has your team really gotten to achieve sort of a semblance of that vision that you were looking for with some time? Because you started in 2014, right? It's 2021 now,
So we started,
Q4.
we yeah, no, we started thinking about it in 2014. So we started the business actually in like late
Oh,
2017. So
right,
it's been kind of
right.
coming up on, yeah. So now it's coming up on 4 years. Yeah, we're off to a great start here. With our team's about 800 people now. Our company
Wow.
will do this year we'll probably do about 230 million in revenues. We just raised $200 million of capital, which brings our total to about 650 million so far, at about a $2.5 billion valuation. So the company is off to a good start. I still really think we're at the tip of the iceberg at this point. This is a company that I think if we got the execution right, can be just a really big business that impacts lots and lots of consumers and families. Mostly because the problem seems to keep on getting hairier. Like you say, like every week you wake up and there's like 3 breaches, your data is out there. People feel kind of completely out of control as to where all this information is going, how it's impacting their finances, how it's impacting their families. So it's just a continuous amount of negative things that are happening in the world around your data, privacy, security, that we think that having a solution that's all in one, autonomous, meaning if you install it on your computer, it looks at things you're doing differently than it looks at stuff that's happening on my computer and my devices, because my browsing patterns and how I use technology might be different than yours. So it learns and gets smarter. So that we've done a good job integrating and putting all this stuff all in one. Now we're starting to rapidly work on the learning system, the AI and the machine learning engine
Wow.
basically underneath it to make the product much more autonomous. So that's the part of the journey we're on now.
I'm excited about that. Not too long ago myself had received a letter in the mail saying that somebody opened a bank account at a bank I've never used. And I was like, what's going on, man? And so when I hear your story, yeah, I then had to call like the credit bureau. I had to call this
Yep.
bank, show up to the bank. I
Yep.
mean, just the time suck. It's just
Yep.
one thing I didn't have to do. So you're right. I would happily look at a service that says, look, we'll take care of all this for you and you can set it up so that you'll never have to worry about it again. And it'll
Exactly
learn
right.
and
And
grow.
exactly. And the thing about it is, if you've been through a negative experience, it's the easiest thing that anybody, looks at and says, oh, this makes a ton of sense to me. The problem is, for the number of people that have not been impacted by it, getting them to think about this as a proactive
They
tool
don't
to say,
know.
hey, don't wait till it happens. That's the big business challenge here. Yeah.
I see what you're saying. Have you even considered how the implications will work around as blockchain becomes more sort of ubiquitous? How maybe Aura can fit into that? Can I ask you about that? Is
Yeah,
that like
yeah,
one of the
absolutely.
things on the?
No, absolutely. So I think it's a great question, right? So when you think about identity proliferation, right? I mean, what is identity? Like, think about sort of, it's basically you proving that you are who you say you are, right?
Right.
And so you've got the ability to sort of look at, some sort of an identifier, like, whether it's your driver's license or your passport or something like that. You say, okay, this is who I am, and then you have an exchange with somebody, you have a transaction with somebody based on you know generating trust by having some sort of identifier, right? So when you think about identity and how much it's morphing over time,
Yeah.
it started with just having a simple username and a password, right? Where basically that was your big authentication thing. And that's gone through a whole chain where it's getting more and more disintermediated, where now, Microsoft tried the passport approach, and then there was basically multiple other providers with various different iterations on it. So blockchain, it's basically a way to kind of create, at least in our world, a distributed view of identity and access for people, if you can kind of get it all fully distributed out. I think from our perspective, there are still a lot of even historic technologies and things that have come up with newer modes of security protocols that are kind of built into it, that are still evolving before blockchain becomes much more rampant inside our ecosystem,
Got
because
it.
the basic use case of it, is still tethered very much in some sort of either, like with smartphones now, you've got biometrics, you've got identifiers, but there's still either two-factor authentication, multi-factor
Yeah.
authentication, or a password plus some other form of authentication on top of it. So I think people are still adopting to that. So by the time we get to a fully
Right.
distributed identity view, there's still some more time to be left there. Is sort of my personal take on it, I think.
And
So
this comes back to the same thing as people not even doing some prep work to avoid this kind of thing to happen to them to begin with. It's like,
yeah, like a simple one, like, passwords, right? I mean, like, you ask people, hey, how many different accounts are you using the same password on? Like 75% of the people will tell you, like, all of my critical accounts are using the same password. So if one of those gets breached, now you got a bunch of headache because multiple things can get breached. So to go from that world of, hey, let's have some basic hygiene, to now using a fully distributed blockchain-based protocol, there's like a little bit of work to be done between here and there, basically.
I remember
So
getting a notification from Google saying my password was part of a data leak that they had or whatever. And there's like 300 accounts I've had to manually over time, because they don't offer you like let me generate a
one
hash.
click, yeah,
Yeah,
one click,
password.
yeah,
And so I'm sitting there,
yeah.
I'm whittling down the list slowly. I made all the critical ones change first, but I'm like, oh man, I can't
It's work.
believe we don't have a solution for this yet.
Yep. That's exactly right. It's a lot of work. Absolutely.
Well, I'm glad someone like you is out there doing it with Aura, man, because it's a real thing. And as the world becomes more digitized, and it's not going backwards. Nothing short of some cataclysmic thing, knock on wood here, is ever going to change the speed that it's going towards a more digital presence with augmented reality. And I mean, I can only imagine the implications of what that means for a company like Aura, and how you're going to get involved there. But that being said, for the listener, where should they learn more about you, stay in touch with you, and sort of, are you active on social links? What's the word?
Yeah, no, I'm definitely very active on LinkedIn. It's under my name, Hari Ravichandran, under Aura. We also have an Instagram page. I think it's Aura_protects. Basically, is our setup there, and on the web, our website is aura.com, www.aura.com. So you can find a bunch of info there. I think all the social links are also listed on there. So would highly encourage people to try it out, check it out, and obviously have any questions about entrepreneurship, anything else, always happy and excited to help fellow entrepreneurs. So.
All right, man. It really is cool talking to someone that's just like no fluff, straightforward business, And when I think about it, it must be cool to say that you never did go back. Your dad, when he said, "Don't to find a way never to come back," it was easy. You became an entrepreneur with a vision, and you've never
Yep.
gone back. You know
No,
what I
no, I
mean?
mean, yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and it's been a good ride. It's we've learned a lot. Done a lot of things right, done a lot of things wrong, and learned from the things we did wrong, and keep on charging forward. So it's been exciting.
Hey, man. So now I hope you'll indulge me in this question, but you are welcome to pass. Like I said earlier, we talked about this before hitting record. If we could have invited anybody today to sit here with us and sort of like chat and, talk about the same things, maybe even put some of their own input in, dead or alive, who would you have invited and why?
I mean, no questions. It would be Steve Jobs. I mean, he is my absolute idol.
Epitome.
Yeah, it just, everything. And I've, read pretty much every bit of literature about him, watched every movie that's out there, and continue to be, again, as any other human, a lot of people, think he's got quirks and flaws and all that, and we're all human. We've got those.
We all
But
do.
when it comes to vision for creating something that didn't exist. There was no personal computer, there was no iPod, there was no iPad, there was no iPhone. And so basically taking problems that people had and building amazing products that basically got mass adoption, where people looked at it and said, it's so intuitive. Like I see my 2-year-old son, he's on his iPad and he knows exactly what to click and what to move around. I mean, it's phenomenal. And just kind of making that stuff up from out of nothing, doing it with a sense of style and taste, doing it in a way that really kind of appeals to both the right and the left brains of human beings, and really connecting with humans. Like I think technology that can connect with humans, I just think that that's the most phenomenal thing, because people can then leverage technology to get better. It makes the human race better. And I feel like he added so much, and we lost somebody like that too early in my estimation. So
Always
if I could
right.
ever have a chance, yeah, would love to have met him. So
I love that, because that tells me the type of vision you hold is true and dear and it's personal, and that you hold your team accountable, but also hold yourself accountable. You apply pressure, but the right kind. So I guess call it eustress. I mean, I hear a lot of great qualities from being able to point to someone like that as someone you admire, and then reflecting on your own journey as an entrepreneur. I'm excited for the things to come from Aura. So again, Hari Ravichandran on LinkedIn, very active there. Go to Aura. Is it aura.com? Is that?
aura.com, exactly.
Yep, aura.com, and all the links will be there, and you can check out more of what's going on. Hari, thank you so much for stopping by, man.
Thank you, Phil. I really appreciate it.